Howdy folks, hope you're all having a good one, and welcome to another episode of Mingles with Jingles. Anybody got any plans for the summer? If so, today's sponsor might come in handy. Well, holiday season is upon us. That's vacation season for those of you on the other side of the Atlantic, and the last thing that you want when you find yourself at your destination of choice is to be struggling to get yourself an internet connection. And that is where Saily comes in. Because quite frankly, when you finally disembark from an 8-hour flight, you've probably got far better things to be doing than standing in line trying to buy a local disposable phone or a local SIM card. And with Saily, from the creators of NordPass, which you can get by heading over to saily.com/jingles and using code JINGLES at checkout, you can put those kind of problems firmly behind you. Saily is an eSIM, and with plans available in over 150 different destinations, it means that you can set up your Wi-Fi and internet access for your phone before you even set foot in your destination of choice. With Saily, you only have to install the eSIM once, which completely eliminates the need for you to install a new eSIM for each country. You don't have to wait in line at the airport to get a local SIM card. You can avoid scammers selling fake SIM cards outside train stations and airports. You can significantly reduce and even eliminate roaming fees. No more wandering around looking for a public Wi-Fi spot, because with an eSIM, you're always connected. And all of Saily's eSIM plans are compatible for both Apple and Android devices. Now, I've recommended Saily before, and for all the same reasons, but this time around they have an even better offer. If you go to saily.com/jingles and use code JINGLES as your coupon code, when selecting the 1 GB data plan option, the first 5,000 will get that 1 GB for free. So that's saily.com/jingles, select the 1 GB plan, use code JINGLES at checkout, and get that 1 GB of data 100% free of charge. So there's been a fair bit of gaming related news this week, and most of it's actually pretty good. Norwegian developer Funcom just announced they didn't announce it, the game's been in development for some time and we've known it's been coming for some time, but they just revealed a whole bunch of gameplay video at Gamescom for their upcoming MMO, Dune Awakening. And I do have to admit to having a bit of a soft spot for Funcom's games. They've never managed to set the world on fire with any of their titles, but they do always at least try to do something a little bit different. Their first big success was back in 1999 with The Longest Journey, which did pretty well, certainly well enough to keep the lights on at the company for the next few years. Their first MMO was Anarchy Online. It was a sort of cyberpunk-y science fiction MMO nearly 20 years before cyberpunk became cool again, and had the distinction of being the first science fiction-based MMO at a time when everybody was just trying to pump out EverQuest clones. And it was alright. I played it and it was fine. Unfortunately, 3 years later World of Warcraft came out. And the rest was history. They have had other moderate successes with MMOs. 4 years after World of Warcraft came out, in 2008, they published Age of Conan, another MMO, this time set in Robert E. Howard's Conan the Barbarian universe. Aside from the setting, the game's other unique selling point, in an effort to make it stand out not just from World of Warcraft itself, but also the host of Warcraft clones that every other developer was pushing out, they focused on what were at the time hyper-realistic graphics. And that was kind of probably the biggest reason why Age of Conan didn't do as well as it might have, because one of Warcraft's biggest strength is its cartoony graphics. They're very simple but effective. And it means that you can run Warcraft on a toaster, but you required a top-end PC in order to play Age of Conan. And the pace of graphics technology was moving on so fast that within a year it looked seriously dated. But they kept up with the theme of always trying to be that one MMO developer that tried new stuff, that kept trying to do things that nobody else was doing, instead of just churning out destined to fail World of Warcraft competitors. And that theme continued with the release of 2012's The Secret World. Does anybody remember that one? Not to be confused with 2017's The Secret World Legends, which was Funcom North America's attempt to update the game and make it more accessible and also free to play, which is just developer code for dumbing the shit down right out of it and making it crap. But the original 2012 release was fantastic. You could play as a member of one of 3 different secret societies, all opposed to each other: the London-based Knights Templar, the New York-based Illuminati, and the Soul-based The Dragon, a Korean secret society. And the whole premise of the game was that all of this mystical folklore horror stuff from the books of people like Stephen King, Edgar Allan Poe, and in particular H.P. Lovecraft, all of this stuff was real. And it wasn't in hiding. It was all out there in the world. And as a member of these 3 secret societies, you were charged with investigating and exploiting for the benefit of your own society. And there was world PvP between the members of the 3 different societies, and a whole bunch of single-player and cooperative MMO content. And it was really, really good. Right until the point where it wasn't. Because that's the problem with trying to do something different. If you're creating something that's, well, niche, it's not going to have mass market appeal in the way that something like World of Warcraft did. I mean, I liked it. I liked it a lot. But I was clearly in the minority because it didn't do badly, but it didn't do well enough to sustain itself. But now they've got their hands on the Dune franchise. Which is ironic because until a couple of years ago, until a certain French-Canadian filmmaker started making some extremely successful movies set in this universe, Frank Herbert's Dune mythology would have probably been considered a bit niche as well, but it's very, very much mainstream right now, which is fortunate for Funcom because they've got their hands on the license. And honestly, I mean, I still play World of Warcraft Classic. I haven't touched retail in about a year, but I'm starting to get a bit of Warcraft fatigue even with that. So I'm looking forward to trying a new MMO. And, well, this could be it. Meanwhile, I've been dipping my toes back into World of Warships over the last couple of weeks, and it hasn't been horrible. It's almost as if Wargaming are actually putting their money where their mouth is. Instead of just trotting out the old, yeah, we're going to have to learn how to communicate better in future excuse every time there's a public relations dumpster fire, which they're 100% responsible for, but never really plan on doing anything about, other than trotting out the, yes, we'll have to learn how to do better to communicate in future excuse, while never actually doing it. But while it has taken them a good 7 or 8 years, based on my initial impressions from my recent foray back into World of Warships, it does look like they're actually, well, doing the things that they've always been saying they were going to do. In particular, one of the final nails in the coffin of my relationship with the company behind the game, Wargaming.net, specifically my involvement in their community contributor program, was the Puerto Rico dumpster fire. Now, I'm sure many of you remember this particular fiasco, but for the benefit of those of you who don't, or perhaps for those of you who do but are sketchy on the details, let me just give you a quick refresher. So, on the World of Warships public test server, right in the run-up to Christmas one year, I can't remember exactly what year it was, 2018 maybe, whatever, not important, they were rolling out a new feature, the Dockyard. Now, at the time, this was quite revolutionary. We'd never seen anything like this in the game before. The idea was that you could basically build a ship from the keel up, and you would do it in this dockyard by means of completing combat missions while playing the game. And in the normal course of events, you would complete these combat missions, and every time you completed a mission, a new part of the ship would be built in the dockyard. For every completed phase of construction, you would get additional rewards, containers, flags, bonuses, camo schemes, all sorts of good stuff. And then when you finally completed the construction of the ship, you would get the USS Puerto Rico, a Tier 10 heavy cruiser, or battle cruiser. Or let's not open that can of worms. Either way, it was a good ship. And more importantly, you could get it for free just by playing the game. And so myself and pretty much everybody else who was on the public test server came away with videos thoroughly recommending this brand new dockyard feature. And then it went live, and it turned out you couldn't actually get it just through the normal course of playing the game. Because it was about, I don't think I'd be exaggerating if I was to say at least 10 times more grindy in reality than it was on the public test realm. A whole bunch of people way better at mathematics than I am sat down and calculated that in order to actually unlock this thing for free, when it had gone live in the run-up to Christmas that year, you would have to play World of Warships for something like 20 hours a day, every day for 3 weeks, in order to beat the deadline and actually be able to earn this thing just by playing the game. So Not technically impossible, which Wargaming were very quick to point out it wasn't impossible to unlock the thing for free, but it was impossible to unlock the thing for free. We'd been lied to, we'd been had, and worse, Wargaming hadn't bothered to correct any of us when we went live after playing the thing on the public test realm and telling everybody what a great feature it was and how accessible and so on and so on. They'd used us to lie for them. And, well, there was a dumpster fire of epic proportions. Everybody called the ship the Puerto Rico rather than the Puerto Rico. There was a huge backlash. And it wasn't the first time, and it wasn't the last time. And of course, every time Wargaming trotted out some poor unfortunate to try to smooth the waters, all they did was put their foot in their mouth and make it worse. At the same time, though, you do have to kind of keep this into perspective, because it was a PR dumpster fire for Wargaming.net, but they're Wargaming.net, you know, they're not Electronic Arts. They're a big fish in the free-to-play market, but they're still a relatively small fish in the global games publishing market as a whole. I mean, you know, they're not Electronic Arts here. Electronic Arts, when they screw the pooch, they don't just ruin it for themselves, they ruin it for every other games publisher, like the Star Wars Battlefront 2 loot box fiasco. I mean, they screwed up so badly there, governments got involved, right? They made loot boxes toxic for the entire industry. They screwed up so badly. Nevertheless, this was probably the high point, or perhaps that should be low point for Wargaming, because this time it wasn't just World of Warships specific social media outlets that were going on about the current disaster with the USS Puerto Rico dockyard thing that Christmas. It was starting to get picked up and gain traction in gaming news websites as a whole, and in some cases it even made it into mainstream media news. So, not their finest moment, and for a lot of people, myself included, it was pretty much the straw that broke the camel's back when it came to Wargaming's bullshit. However, it did have a bit of a silver lining, because it appears to have been the catalyst that finally made Wargaming actually change its ways. Because in the wake of the USS Puerto Rico dumpster fire, they actually started making positive changes to the game based on community feedback, instead of just saying they would and then waiting for the fuss to die down, everybody to forget about it, and then just carrying on business as usual, which had been their standard mode of operation for the previous 4 or 5 years. They actually started making some positive changes, including with regards to the operations game mode and future dockyard events, which you could actually complete without having to play 20 hours a day for 3 weeks flat in order to unlock the new ships for free. For example, when I logged into World of Warships recently, there's another dockyard event running for some tier 10 Spanish cruiser. I can't remember the name of the thing. And I was expecting more of the same with regards to what happened with the USS Puerto Rico. But I'm halfway through completing unlocking this ship just by playing a couple of hours every day, and there's still 40 days to go. It's actually achievable. So, yeah, very surprised. And it took them about a year in order to do it, but shortly after the Puerto Rico thing, they announced upcoming changes. In particular, of interest to me at least, were changes to the operations game mode, which I've always found to be really, really fun, but which got gutted post-aircraft carrier rework. A whole bunch of very popular operations got removed from the rotation due to the way that the players interacted with aircraft, which had changed drastically with the aircraft carrier rework. And they always promised they were going to fix them and put the operations back in, but again, that was just them saying what we wanted to hear in order to get us to shut up about it. They'd never actually planned to do it, but post-USS Puerto Rico dockyard dumpster fire, they actually put their money where their mouth was, and they didn't just reintroduce these missing operations back into the rotation, they actually improved upon them and expanded the tiers of ships that could take part in the operations. This was fantastic news. And having just come back off the World of Warships public test realm, they're doing it again. Because they originally expanded the operations to ships of tier 6 to 8, where previously it had been tier 5, 6 and 7, I think. So you could finally get some use out of your tier 8 ships in these operations game modes. Well, what they're doing now is they're expanding it to include tier 9, 10 and super ships. Because, I mean, I've got 471 ships sitting in my port in World of Warships, and the vast majority of them I never play. I'd have more than 471, I might actually have 500 or more, except I sold a whole bunch of Tier 1s and 2s in order to free up port slots for some new Tier 10s and super ships that I've been grinding out. But of the 471 ships that I currently own, I probably play 25 to 30 of them, and they're mostly the Tier 8s. Because that's the highest tier that you can currently play in operations. So I've got hundreds of dockyard queens just sitting around in my port gathering rust. But with these upcoming changes to the operations game mode, I can play all of my tier 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 and super ships in the operations game mode. And they're simultaneously making it a little bit easier and a bit more of a challenge. Because the current tier spread for your team in operations is 2 tiers, but they're reducing it to 1, but they're also heavily buffing the hit points of the opponents that you're going to face. So there's a whole bunch of changes coming up in the operations game mode for, which I probably should have mentioned at some point prior to this, World of Warships 9th anniversary. Yep, game's been around 9 years. They're also bringing back performance bonuses, so this is something that was new to me because it's been a while since I've actually played World of Warships. But there are performance bonuses that you can unlock tied to each ship that you own. But you don't have to play each ship that you own in order to collect the bonus on it. So how this works in practice, let's say, for example, you really like playing the USS Massachusetts and your Bismarck. So you play those 2 ships over and over and over if you want to. It's entirely up to you. And every time you pass an experience threshold earned on those 2 ships, you can collect the bonus associated with a ship that you don't like to play. So you can still collect the bonuses on the ships that you don't like without actually having to play them. Just play the ships that you do like. And as long as you keep accumulating experience, you can collect all the bonuses. Yeah, I know. Letting you do things that you do enjoy in order to progress, rather than forcing you to do things that you don't enjoy in order to progress. Who the hell are you, and what have you done with real wargaming? I mean, at the end of the day, Wargaming are a company. They exist to earn money. I mean, it sounds obvious, but it is worth repeating. The thing is, and it took them the best part of a decade to actually come to this conclusion, but there are ways to earn money from your community that don't necessarily have to be predatory and anti-consumer. I'm reminded of the occasion here where myself, this must have been more than 10 years ago, because it wasn't anything to do with World of Warships. This was actually World of Tanks. So myself and a bunch of other members of the World of Tanks community were invited to Cyprus, Wargaming's headquarters, to speak with the head honcho, the man himself, Victor Kisley. And the point that I brought up at the meeting was to do with the economic disparity between the various different countries that make up the EU server in World of Tanks. And the same thing applies to World of Warships, or it would, but World of Warships wasn't out then. You see, here's the thing. And this isn't really so much, or it wasn't really so much of an issue for like the Russian server or the North American server, but the EU server, there's a lot of different countries in the EU. There's one less now, of course, but that's a different story. And not all of those countries have the same levels of economy. If you live in a place like Germany or France or Britain, we had strong economies. If you live in some place like Portugal or Greece, not so much, which means the players across the EU all have different levels of buying power depending on which country they live in. So what World of Tanks were doing at the time was every time they introduced a new premium tank, you couldn't just go to the web store and buy the tank. You could only buy it as part of a bundle. So you'd get the tank, you'd get like a month of premium time, a bunch of consumables, and so on and so on and so on. And you wouldn't get an awful lot of change out of 60 to 70 euros, depending on the tier of the premium tank that you were buying with the associated bundle. Now, if you were a player in Germany or France or Britain, that wasn't nothing. That's a substantial amount of money to drop on a free-to-play game, maybe once a month, every time a new premium comes out, but you could do it. If you lived in a country with a weaker economy, like Portugal or Greece, it was just not going to happen. You just couldn't afford it. You couldn't justify spending that amount of your monthly income on a bunch of pixels in a free-to-play game. It was just out of your pocket. Couldn't do it. Not only that, players like myself who already had years of premium time stockpiled and didn't need any consumables, I kind of resented being expected to put my hand in my pocket and shell out a whole bunch of money for extra stuff that I didn't want just in order to get this new premium tank that I did. So the suggestion that I made to Victor Kisley was introduce different bundles. Have the cheapest bundle at a price that anybody could afford and just sell them the tank itself. That's it. No commander, no premium time, no consumables, nothing. Just the tank. And then everybody across the whole EU cluster could afford that. And then have progressively more expensive bundles for people who did also want, like, fully trained crews, extra consumables, premium account time, and all that sort of stuff. So have your €70 bundle with everything and the premium tank. But then also at the other end of the spectrum, have just the tank at a price that anybody could afford. Because by pricing their bundles, or in fact only selling them as part of the bundles with such an aggressive price point, Wargaming were leaving money on the table. Because there's people that wanted these tanks, but they just couldn't afford to buy all of the associated crap that came with them. Or they just didn't need all of the associated crap that came with them, and therefore wouldn't buy it because they just, and I was often in this position, resented being expected to put their hands in their pocket for a whole bunch of shit they didn't need just to get the one tank that they did. Wargaming were leaving money on the table. And that was the trick. Pointing out to their CEO that he was leaving money on the table was what it took to get them to actually be more receptive towards their community. Because there's a happy medium ground between pricing everything as aggressively as you possibly can in order to make the maximum amount of money and keeping your community happy by selling them what they actually want. And you can actually make more money overall if you adopt that position. And I pointed this out to them more than 10 years ago. And to their credit, they did actually very quickly realise that they were onto a winner here. They could make more money overall. And they quickly started changing the bundles available on the World of Tanks web store. And when World of Warships came out, and they started selling stuff for that too, they adopted the same policy. You see, the trick when you're dealing with these companies is you have to show them a way that they can actually profit from keeping their community happy. Now that can be something as obvious, or well, I say obvious, but it took an idiot like me to point out what I thought was obvious to them and then for them to implement it. But it can also be just something as simple as focusing on making the game fun to play. I haven't spent money on, I don't think I've spent money on World of Tanks in 10 years, and I don't think I've spent money on World of Warships in 4 or 5. But I've spent money on World of Warships recently because I've been having fun playing it. And I didn't feel any pressure to spend money on the game either, because that's another thing that they like to do, isn't it? And we're not just talking World of Warships and World of Tanks here, but, well, games in general. Put pressure on you by making stuff as grindy as possible so that you feel that you need to spend some money to skip the grind, and that really hasn't been the case either. I've been enjoying the grind, by which I mean, just playing the game. I don't feel any pressure to shorten it. Perfect example being the current Dockyard event. And again, I can't even remember the name of the ship. I know it's some kind of Spanish cruiser. I don't particularly want it, but I certainly haven't been spending money on premium time in order to maximise the rate at which I go through the Dockyard missions in order to get this ship. I don't even know what the ship is. I really don't care. But just by playing the game normally, I'm already more than halfway towards unlocking this thing, and there's around about 40 days of playtime left before the Dockyard feature ends, so I'm going to get this ship, whether I want it or not. Fine, another ship, and a whole bunch of rewards along the way for completing each Dockyard phase, but I'm not actively grinding it out. I don't actually care. What I do care about is the fact that it's fun. And I've always been more than happy to put money into something that I have fun doing. Even if I don't need to. I do it because I want to. It's been a very, very long time since I felt like that about World of Warships. I'm just glad it's back. In other news, Gearbox Software's CEO, Randy Pitchford, he's done it again. He's opened his mouth and inserted his foot right in it. Well, to be completely fair, he hasn't actually lied or said anything stupid this time, which must be quite an unusual experience for Randy Pitchford. Well, he has said something stupid. The thing is, he said something stupid a couple of years ago, and it's only just come back to bite him in the arse. So, all of the Borderlands games have just been re-released on Steam. And they've just announced that Borderlands 4 will be coming out on PC on Steam. Now, no doubt this is all happening due to the fact that well, not everybody, but a lot of people are talking about Borderlands at the moment. Unfortunately, most of what people are saying about Borderlands is, oh my god, how could Kevin Hart and Cate Blanchett possibly think it was a good idea to star in this dumpster fire? The movie is currently up to a dizzying 10% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes, which is 10% higher than it was on the day of release. But hey, at least people are talking about it. Well, what people are also talking about are some extremely ill-advised comments that Randy Pitchford made a couple of years back when he made the exceptionally short-sighted decision to release Borderlands 3 not on Steam for PC, but the Epic Game Store. He said, and I quote, "From a track record point of view, my expectation is that Epic's investment in technology will outpace Valve's substantially. When we look back at Steam in 5 or 10 years, it may look like a dying store and other competitive stores will be the place to be." He also claimed that Epic will inevitably surpass Valve on features and quality of service. Randy, the internet asked this week, based on the Gamescom reveal trailers, it hasn't escaped our attention that Borderlands is coming crawling back to what you called a dying platform 5 years ago. Why is that, Randy? And of course, Randy, because he's entirely incapable of ever admitting fault, blamed it all on Epic. Apparently, Epic just weren't trying hard enough. Which is a bold claim, considering they threw so much money at games developers trying to get the Epic Game Store off the ground that it was projected that the store wasn't actually going to turn a profit in its first 10 years of operation. To be fair to good old Randy, though, even though he's pathologically incapable of ever saying, oh yeah, I was wrong, I was actually full of shit when I made those original predictions. My bullish confidence about the future of the Epic Game Store and the predicted demise of Steam were motivated not so much by any actual facts, but by the eye-watering amounts of money that Epic had thrown at me in order to make Borderlands 3 an Epic Game Store exclusive. But he does still kind of have a point, because Epic, instead of just throwing colossal amounts of monies and what were effectively bribes to games developers to sign up for exclusive Epic Store deals, at no point did it ever occur to them to just offer a better platform than Steam. There's a bit of a theme emerging in this week's episode, isn't there? Just do better, and the money will come. Nah, it'll never catch on. And in the spirit of attempting to promote success by just giving the people what they want, that's it for this week's episode of Mingles with Jingles. If you liked it, leave a like. If you really liked it, subscribe. And if you didn't, don't. See how that works? It's really not hard, is it? Take care, folks, and I'll catch you next time.